Yo, what's up? My name's Patrouski, and welcome to part 2 of my most popular video ever. I never would have imagined in a million years that a video that I uploaded about a game that I've loved for over 10 years and have put over 9,000 hours into at this point could reach over 500,000 views on YouTube. So firstly, thank you all for that. And secondly, I'm excited to unveil this new and improved updated list with you all since this game has changed so much over the past 3 years. Due to the efforts of every single player within the PokeMMO community, old players, new players, the developers, all the plethora of new content creators, the game's been experiencing a bit of a renaissance since 2021. And it's really rare you see a game that's almost 10 years old all of a sudden start monstrously growing and getting more popular. And we're fortunate to say that's exactly what's been happening to PokeMMO. I'm just so proud to be part of such an amazing community, and we truly are in the best timeline for this beautiful game. But enough yapping, let's go ahead and actually get into the guide. Welcome to 63 tips for beginners. Let's go ahead and start things off by defining what a beginner is. A beginner to me is someone who hasn't completed all 5 of the storyline regions. However, this is not always the case. There are people like Rocket, a fellow PokeMMO content creator who has thousands of hours in the game, knows a ton about the game with a ton of game knowledge, and I would not at all ever call him a beginner, but he has spent most of his time in Kanto due to playing a region-locked style account. Just something to keep in mind, if you're the average new player without all 5 storylines done, this video is for you, and I hope you find it helpful. But I hope there's at least something for everybody in here. Everybody's PokeMMO journey is different, and if you walk away with one tip on this video, make sure to give it a like and possibly a subscribe for more content like it. And if you're looking for even more beginner-friendly tips, you can check out my original 63 tips for beginners video linked in the description, which is even more beginner-focused for players still in their first storyline or in their first week of their PokeMMO journey. Let's finally jump into it with tip number 1. Tip number 1, and the most important new tip for PokeMMO in 2025, is to turn on instant text speed. This is one of the biggest changes as of recent in the game. And you can adjust this very important setting by going over to settings, going over to gameplay, and then seeing your text speed. Before this update, which happened within a few months, you could only go up to a maximum of 4 times text speed. Now they've added 5 times and instant text speed. This is going to make your gameplay faster, make it so you're able to get through the storylines quicker, XP train quicker, EV train, shiny hunt, everything quicker. And when you're playing an MMO, it's super important to be playing at the same pace as everyone. This change happened in correlation with the custom strings nerf, where if you're a new player, I really don't want you to worry about that, but it was essentially an archaic old way for us to speed up our game to keep things on a fair playing field. But thankfully nowadays we can just go into the settings and turn our text speed up. This is the first thing that every new player should do playing PokeMMO in 2025, or if you're a returning or old player, make sure to check your settings and make sure this is on instant. Tip number 2 for those still going through a storyline is to battle every single trainer. Trainers are really important during a storyline because not only do they give you that little bit of extra Pokeyen, which really adds up, they also give you extra XP. You get something called bonus trainer XP when battling trainers as opposed to wild Pokemon. And the PokeMMO storyline can be legitimately tough. You don't want to be stuck on a gym because you're under-leveled, so making sure to battle every single trainer to follow a nice level curve is super crucial. This is not something you would normally do in a traditional Pokemon game. If anything, you would skip every trainer possible, but in PokeMMO, you won't regret it. Tip number 3 might be a little bit of a contentious one, but in my opinion, during the storylines, people need to worry less about typing and more about raw Pokemon power. For example, if you're going up against a grass gem, I would worry less about getting some sort of fire type or flying type to perfectly counter it like you normally would in any Pokemon game. You understand the type chart, you understand the strengths and weaknesses. In PokeMMO, when you have 5 generations of Pokemon, you have Pokemon that are so much more powerful than the other ones in the storyline, it's usually best to try to go for raw power and push your way through. For example, in my opinion, a Dragon Dance Gyarados is going to stomp anything in the storyline versus getting a correct typing Pokemon. If it's not obvious, most of these things on this list are going to be opinion influenced to some extent. If you want to disagree or ignore any of these tips because you have more fun that way, I encourage you to do so. If you want to go for flying types only, then please go for it. But if you're stuck and having a tough time pushing through the storyline, I strongly encourage you to look for these powerful Pokemon. Things like Gyarados, things like Moxie Crocodile, Moxie Scrafty, Porygon Z. I have plenty of lists of what the most powerful Pokemon are to beat PokeMMO. Tip number 4, make sure to abuse the GTL as soon as you unlock 4 gym badges. Don't be afraid to buy things that could help you beat the storylines quicker. This game is an MMO. You're only holding yourself back if you're playing it like a single player game, unless you're of course playing an Iron Man style of account. But being able to sell some of the Pokemon you've caught up until that point, possibly buying some cheaper Pokeballs off of the market, or maybe even buying some really high power items if you can afford it by the time you're at the Elite Four or something like that, you could always go ahead and pick up a choice band by the time you're at the Elite Four and then sell it back to the market. Now you will lose like around 10k or so on the listing fee, so it's not totally free to just buy a permanent item like this and then sell it back, but something like that can often help people get that final push over the Elite Four or certain gyms. Next up, tip number 5 is to simply catch Pokemon. It's really powerful in PokeMMO and it's a lot of fun. There's a 1 out of 6-ish chance that Pokemon will have a 31 IV, and those are worth a little bit of Pokeyen. Now, if you aren't familiar with IVs, they are essentially the DNA of the Pokemon. Every Pokemon has an IV in each stat, and they will all be different. They can roll anywhere from 0 to 31 in each of the following stats: HP, attack, defense, special attack, special defense, and speed. As a newer player, all you really need to worry about is keeping an eye out for those green numbers, and you can usually sell them for a little bit of Pokeyen depending on the egg group. People are going to use these Pokemon as breeders to then make their other Pokemon more powerful. As you can see here, a 31 HP monster egg group Pokemon goes for around 5,000 to 6,000 Pokeyen. Not nearly as valuable as they used to be, or as good of a farming method for new players as they used to be about 3 or 4 years ago, but still really solid starting Pokeyen. A Pokemon with 1 green IV is usually referred to as a 1x31. A Pokemon with 2 31 or perfect IVs is referred to as a 2x31, 3x31, and so on. You can catch 2x31s or 3x31s in the wild, the same way you can with all the other ones, but it just gets exceedingly more rare. 2x31s are about a 1 out of 78 chance, so if you're a luckier new player or you catch enough Pokemon, you could get about 1 of these every hour to 2 hours, making yourself a nice 40k Pokeyen or so, depending on the species. TLDR, catch Pokemon. It's really good for you. Next up, tip number 6 is to catch yourself a teleport Pokemon. You can find Abras over here north of Cerulean City in early game Kanto. You want teleport because it can help you get back to a PC very quickly. Teleport is fantastic because it essentially acts as an early game budget fly HM. You can't go anywhere with it, but you can go to your last visited PC. As we can see here with my Ralts teleport. Ralts is another early game teleport Pokemon you can get over in the Hoenn region, over at these following wild locations: over at Route 102 in Hoenn, or in Sinnoh, you can go over to Route 208 or 209. A quick teleport trick that I often use is in the Kanto storyline. When you're making your way through the Diglett Cave, you go ahead and make your way all the way through Diglett Cave so you can pop out on the other end and get the HM Flash. And then once you're on the other side, if you've marked your location correctly, just by it being the last PC that you visited, you could go talk to the person, get your HM, and then use teleport. And instead of having to travel back all the way through the cave, you just go right back to the PC. This saves you honestly a ton of time in the storyline, and this is something I try to always employ when I do the Kanto storyline. Tip number 7 is to get yourself a catching Pokemon, whether you're buying it off the GTL at 4 gym badges or catching your own. Some early game catching Pokemon include Paris over here at Mount Moon in Kanto, or things like Shroomish you can catch early game in Hoenn, or a Smeargle later game in Hoenn and other locations. A catching Pokemon, for those who don't know, generally consists of a Pokemon with False Swipe and Spore. It allows you to hit wild Pokemon down to 1 HP safely, spore them, increasing their catch rate even more, and gives you the maximum catch rate of most wild Pokemon. A really underrated catching Pokemon that I like to use during the storylines or during my Nuzlocke that I did of PokeMMO years ago is a Sleep Powder Butterfree. This Pokemon gets Compound Eyes, so it boosts Sleep Powder to being a 97.5% accurate move or so. And Caterpie is caught abundantly in Kanto in the early game. And then later on, Butterfree can get Quiver Dance and be a pretty mean Elite Four Pokemon or storyline Pokemon. With tip number 5 being to catch Pokemon, it's really important to also follow along with step 7 and get a catching Pokemon, so that your catching Pokemon can help you catch Pokemon, so you can catch more Pokemon to then make more Pokeyen to then catch more Pokemon. It's a perfect gameplay loop. Tip number 8 is to spend as little Pokeyen as possible on things like healing items and potions and revives during your storyline runs. I see a lot of players just blowing through their Pokeyen because they kind of forget the games at MMO, and in traditional Pokemon, what else do you have your Pokeyen to spend on? You pretty much just buy Pokeballs and buy things from the Pokemart, but in PokeMMO, you have a whole player market to deal with, so that Pokeyen is that much more valuable. But at the same time, don't be afraid to buy things to help you during your storyline run. Using hyper potions, super potions, revives especially, are super crucial to actually getting past those Elite Fours or tough gyms. X items can be really powerful as well if you really want to push past a stuck part. It's a fine balance of being willing to spend enough Pokeyen to push past things, to just be able to progress faster, but also don't drop the whole cash stack. Next up, tip number 9 is that /unstuck is a thing. If you don't know, /unstuck is a command that if you type it within the chat and you wait 2 minutes, you'll be sent all the way back to the starting town within the region. So if for some reason you need to head back there, if you switch to a new region and want to switch back to your previous region, you can actually generally unstuck and go back to your mom and talk to her, and she'll take you back to your previous region. That is only possible if you haven't unlocked the dock city in your new region, so keep that in mind. But sometimes players just generally get stuck via bugs. It's really rare that that happens, but you can kind of soft lock yourself occasionally in a way. Once again, very rare, and it's important to know that the unstuck command exists. And if you accidentally unstuck or something like that, if you just move around, it will cancel it, so you don't have to worry about it. And then tip number 10 is to play your favorite region first. Or Unova. Unova's really strong for new players. If you're kind of undecided and don't really know what region to play, I do have a video called What's the Best Region in PokeMMO that goes over all of the detailed positives and negatives of each region within the game. By the way, any video of mine that I reference throughout this video will be linked in the description, so if you want a nice plethora of starting materials for new players, make sure to check all of those out if you have any questions. Now, tip number 11 is the best pure Pokeyen money-making method for new players that I can recommend. You do need the Sinnoh region complete to be able to do this, but for tip number 11, I recommend getting yourself a trainer rerun cloister. I'll have a full guide for this linked in the description, but with a simple cloister, just one Pokemon with 31 attack, 31 speed, EV trained in those stats, and then a plus attack nature, lonely, naughty, or adamant. Make sure it's not brave, that will hurt the speed, and then with only one move, Icicle Spear, you can make around 200,000 Pokeyen per hour just battling trainers around the region. Once again, a full guide for this will be in the description. The trainers you fight is really important, but getting a good cloister if you're done the Sinnoh region is heavily encouraged and can be a super powerful way for new players to build up their Pokeyen. And then tip number 12 is in the same vein. I strongly recommend building a gym rerun team once you have 2 to 4 regions done. Once again, a full guide will be linked for this in the description. This one's a bit more advanced. You definitely need more regions done aside from just Sinnoh, probably 2 to 4, depending on if you have Unova done. The more regions done, the better, essentially. You can make upwards of 500,000 Pokeyen doing a really good gym rerun with things like an E4 rerun thrown in, but that gets pretty advanced. This is a solid beginner gym rerun team that I usually recommend to people. Something like a Typhlosion with 25 plus special attack and speed. You really need a modest, mild, or rash nature. That's kind of needed. And then something like a sacrificial lead Torkoal with explosion and drought, and then a sacrificial lead Cottony with tailwind and prankster. Now you can upgrade these teams later down in the road. I think it's really important to call out that there are tons of different gym rerun strategies, like the famous 6 pillars ones that are now being used by other players. I really like this one because it's very low effort. I still use this one, even though I would call this a beginner gym rerun strategy, which is super important to talk about. As you play through PokeMMO, you'll come to know that this game is a marathon, not a sprint. For some players, you may want to do a lower effort thing, but it'll make it so you're able to do it every day consistently for months or maybe even years on end. Some players will try to do the highest level thing or the most efficient thing and then burn out from the game within a few months or maybe even a few weeks. But for some players, this type of beginner team is too boring for them. So if you're someone who wants to be a little more stimulated and wants to like kind of item switch and do all these complicated things, I cannot recommend you more to check out tons of other guides and just really find the best gym rerun guide that works for you. But I would recommend beginners starting with double Typhlosion and the Cottony and Torkoal strat. Gym reruns can once again make anywhere from around 250,000 Pokeyen at the low end all the way up to 500,000 Pokeyen at the high end. And that's within 1 hour. You should probably do your 1 hour run every single day. A lot of people do it to start their mornings. You wake up, you do your Jimmy run, and then you can sort of do whatever you want in the game. Next up, tip number 13 is to get yourself something called an encounter counter. I personally use GEC, or Gillen's Encounter Counter. You can see in the top right. That's what that little shuckle and number represents. It represents that I've done 53,169 wild Pokemon encounters since my last shiny Pokemon. Encounter counters are really important if you're someone who wants to shiny hunt or XP train or EV train or just play the game in general for a couple of reasons. Number one, it helps adds perspective. A lot of players will leave storyline runs and they'll have like 600 hours in the game, which is a ton of hours, and be like, man, I'm 600 hours dry for a shiny. But as we've calculated on my stream in the past, players will only really end up with around 5 to 10,000 encounters during their storyline run. So it makes sense. You leave with 600 hours, you feel like you've done a ton of encounters, but in actuality, you're not really that close to a shiny at all, and having more counters doesn't really make you closer to a shiny, quote unquote. But that becomes a topic for a different video. The main thing to understand is that it just adds perspective and helps you realize how many encounters you're actually getting, and also how fast you can get them. A lot of players will once again do 600 hours of storylines, feel like they have a lot of encounters, but then go do ×5 hordes and actually hard go for a shiny for just a few hours and surpass all of the encounters they've done up until that point. Passively going for a shiny is really slow and really tedious. Directly going for one is much faster, still pretty slow and still pretty tedious, but that's the beauty of the journey. Shiny hunting in PokeMMO is not for everybody, especially with an encounter rate of about 1 out of 30,000 on average. PokeMMO is definitely the hardest Pokemon game to shiny hunt in, and that's what turns so many players away from it, but it's also what makes it so that the best shiny hunters get their chance to shine here. Here's a quick example of what the encounter looks like when I actually go ahead and get a battle. It should go up by 5 encounters here by me encountering 5 Sandslash right there. Boom, there we go. And the second reason to use an encounter counter is to help you make it feel like you're making faux progress. Now, if you understand statistics and you understand Gambler's Fallacy, whenever you're getting encounters in PokeMMO, you're not actually getting more likely or closer to getting a shiny. Your shiny rate is always 1 out of 30,000 physically in game. Just like how when you flip a coin, no matter how many times you flip it, it's always a 50-50 chance whether it'll land on heads or tails. The coin itself does not remember how many times it's been flipped. But a lot of shiny hunters kind of use the encounter counter to mentally trick themselves. Whatever helps you make progress at the end of the day is really important. It's good to understand, hey, logically, I know that I'm not making progress, but if you trick yourself into making progress, it kind of helps you keep going. There's nothing more demotivating than waking up, shiny hunting for 10 hours, and then going to bed and seeing absolutely no changes within your game. But waking up, shiny hunting for 10 hours, and then going to bed and seeing your encounter counter at 10,000, hey man, it's something. And the entire point of shiny hunting within PokeMMO, and shiny hunting arguably in general, is all about not giving up. We don't actually care about those beautiful sparkly noises. We care about the journey and continuing forward, even when the odds are stacked against us, and even if we also want to give up. If you're brave enough, I cannot recommend you try shiny hunting in PokeMMO enough. But next up, tip number 14 is to catch yourself a sweet scent Pokemon, which kind of goes into our last one. I'm going to be showing you guys here a sweet scent Hoppip. Sweet scent is really important because it's how we do any sort of efficient XP training, EV training, shiny hunting. Pretty much any grinding in PokeMMO is done via sweet scent. If you use the sweet scent ability, which can be hotkeyed up to your hotbar by going over into the Pokemon that you have, going over to the white star, and then slotting it into a specific hotkey. Now, once you're out of PP like this, you will have to go back to the PC or use Leppa berries, which cost around 1,000 Pokeyen a piece, closer to 800 a piece, so they're kind of expensive, but if I wanted to, I could go ahead and try to use Sweet Scent again, and then use Leppa berries to replenish the PP. However, this is what most players do when XP training or EV training or shiny hunting like this. You want to leave the cave or whatever location you're at, teleport back to the PC, it'll put you right in front of the daycare, and watch the number as I heal. It will restore the PP and put the number back up to 32, which will then allow me to get 6 more Sweet Scents. Now, what Pokemon you get while sweet sending all depends on the location that you're at. Over there at the Victory Road in Johto, you get 5 times hordes of Sandslash 100% of the time. But there's other locations where you could get things 50-50, kind of split. You could get hordes that are 20% for like a Tauros and 80% for other Pokemon. Whatever location you're at is going to decide what Pokemon you get via the sweet send. And you can see what Pokemon have what hordes where by usually using the Pokedex. If you're looking for a specific Pokemon to shiny hunt, you can check whether or not it has a horde over in the Pokedex with the wild locations. We can see that Sandslash is kind of a quote-unquote common shiny, even though there's not really any common shinies in PokeMMO, and has multiple horde locations around the map. But obviously, something like a Charmander or a Charizard, these are not going to have hordes. You cannot horde shiny hunt every single Pokemon or horde every Pokemon in general. Only some Pokemon are hordeable. Next up for tip 15, a quick settings tip. This is really important for shiny hunters, second monitor players, and anyone sort of AFKing or alt-tabbing back and forth. I strongly recommend turning off mute audio when window unfocused. This is nice if you're like playing the in-game music and you want to alt-tab out and do something else and you don't have that music playing at the same time. It's kind of annoying, but this is really important if you're alt-tabbing while shiny hunting and watching a movie. I had this accidentally turned on while shiny hunting for my shiny Celio, and it made it so that I literally didn't hear the shiny noise at all, and I almost ran from the shiny. Now, thankfully in PokeMMO, if you try to run from a shiny, it'll actually say, hey, you're about to run from a shiny. Are you sure you want to do that? That was honestly one of the best quality of life updates ever added to the game. So that's something to keep in mind, but at the same time, it's really important to have this unchecked so you don't possibly make the mistake of running from a shiny. Tip number 16 is another simple but crucial one. Always buy Pokeballs. It is almost never bad to spend your Pokeyen on Pokeballs. It's almost impossible to buy too many Pokeballs. I have so many Pokeballs over in my bag, almost 8,000 normal Pokeballs, 151 Great Balls, over 100 Ultra Balls. We see 600 Repeat Balls, almost 400 Timer Balls, some Premiers because why not, some Luxury Balls. You can almost never have too many Pokeballs. If you play long enough, you'll find a usage for them, and you never want to be caught without the correct Pokeball for the right situation, and you never want to miss out on a shiny because you were too cheap or lazy to buy Pokeballs. Now, tip number 17 is the most important if you're stuck on the Elite Fours, which can be pretty tricky in PokeMMO, so a lot of players find themselves stuck on these. Tip number 17 is to catch yourself a sturdy Stealth Rock Pokemon, something like a Geodude or an Onix. These Pokemon can usually be found over at Victory Roads in most locations, or even in certain early game caves, things like Mount Moon and Kanto. Or you could buy one off the GTL by going over to the global trade link, scrolling down until you see has ability, typing in sturdy, and then scrolling up until you see has move, typing in Stealth Rocks, hitting search, and then looking for the lowest priced one. The level of the Pokemon, the stats of the Pokemon, all that stuff literally do not matter, because no matter how hard this Pokemon is hit, unless it's by a multi-attacking move, it's going to survive because of sturdy and allow it to get off Stealth Rocks. Stealth Rocks are pretty bad in traditional Pokemon storylines. However, in PokeMMO, in the Elite Fours, they're very, very good, because number one, a lot of the Elite Four Pokemon have sturdy, have focus sashes, can be really, really difficult to get that extra little bit of chip damage that seriously matters in PokeMMO. And then on top of it, after every Elite Four leader in PokeMMO, your whole party is healed. So every time you lead with a sacrificial lead, like that Stealth Rock Pokemon, it actually gets healed for the next fight. I think this is the number one tip I give to new players, and I'm so lucky to see so many people coming back to me saying, hey man, I was really stuck on the Elite Four until I tried this. This solved all my problems. It helped me out so much. Thank you for that tip. Tip number 18 is to get your free XP shares from the storylines within PokeMMO, or just when you get to 4 gym badges, go ahead and make sure to buy them, and you can always sell them back if you need to. XP shares are super, super important in PokeMMO. I have 5 of them for all the EV training and XP training that I do. If you want a list of all the XP training or XP share locations, here you go. This is a list from the Bulbapedia of the XP share item, which shows all the locations throughout the storylines where you can achieve them. You can go ahead and just start at FRLG from the side. That is Fire Red Leaf Green, which is Kanto. And then you have HGSS, which is Heart Gold Soul Silver, which is Johto in PokeMMO. Then you have RSE, which is Hoenn in PokeMMO at the Devon Corporation. That's going to be Ruby, Sapphire, Emerald. And then you have DPPT, which is Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum. That's over at Route 206 in Sinnoh in PokeMMO, and then Black and White in Castelia City in PokeMMO aka Unova, and Icarus City. And there's 2 different XP shares you can actually get for free in the Unova storyline. Now, those XP shares are untradeable, so you can't just go get them and then sell them for Pokeyen, but you can use them to your heart's content and get a ton of value. And then tip number 19, one of the most important pieces of knowledge in PokeMMO, learn basic price checking via reverse searching on the GTL. Now, reverse searching is essentially, let's just use a Pokemon that I have. Let's say that I have this Smeargle over here, right? If I were to want to price check this Smeargle, I would go ahead and see, okay, this is a level 100 Smeargle. Let me go ahead and look for the level. Smeargle is a desired species. I can go ahead and do that and say, okay, the cheapest level 100 Smeargle, regardless of the IVs, is going to be around 140 to 150k, which is honestly really, really good for a level 100 Pokemon. Now, basic price checking can get a lot more complicated than this. You could do things if you're catching Pokemon for profit. You're not going to worry about the level. You're just going to worry about the egg group, the gender, and then the IVs. So something you'll often see is something like Magikarp catching in the Safari Zone for early game profit. Now, we would go over to Magikarp in the Safari Zone, see that it is both Water B and the Dragon Egg group. You would head over. The Dragon Egg group's probably more expensive, but you might want to check both. And let's say you caught a Magikarp that is 31 attack IV only, and that's all that really matters on it, right? You would go ahead and see that the cheapest male Magikarp or male Dragon Egg group Pokemon is worth around 50k or so. I know this is kind of overwhelming, and the honest truth of it is that this is just something that takes time and practice and energy. I can kind of teach you the basics of reverse search, and I can show you the price or the description, the guide and the description, but I can't implant the knowledge that I've had from playing this game for 10 years directly into your brain as I wish I could. A lot of things in Pokemon are going to be like this. I can teach you how to do it. I can teach you how to fish, but at the end of the day, a lot of players, you have to end up going to fish for your own, and thankfully, most players in PokeMMO do. And it's a lot of fun to learn how to fish. Price checking Pokemon in PokeMMO has one of the lowest skills floors, so it's really easy to kind of learn some of the basics, but then it also has some of the highest skill ceilings. There are so many things to factor in when price checking a Pokemon. Things like the nature, the gender, the species of it. Is it shiny? Is it alpha? Does it have egg moves? Is it from a specific egg group? Does it have any specific particles in PokeMMO? What are the IVs? Which IVs are relevant? Does it have hidden ability access? Is it EV trained? What does it have a specific ability that it needs? There are so many things to factor in. Was it recently changed in a PvP tier? Is it a hot button Pokemon? Is it being used for raids? Is it being used for PVM? There's so much game knowledge here, and it just takes time to learn it all. I always compare price checking a Pokemon to price checking a car. I get a lot of people coming into my chat saying, hey, Patrouski, how much is my 31 attack, 31 speed gold duck worth? And it's kind of like if someone was like, hey, Patrouski, how much is my, 2016 Toyota worth? And I have to ask, okay, well, what's the make and model? How many miles do you have on it? Has it ever had water damage? What are the Carfax? When was the last time it had new tires? When was the last time you had its oils changed? I don't know much about cars, but I can understand there's a lot that goes into actually evaluating the cost of a car. The same thing, the cost of a Pokemon is very complicated. So I appreciate those who don't come into my stream and ask me, hey, how much is this worth? Unfortunately, it's something that just comes with game knowledge. I can try to do my best to help you, but it's not really a simple thing. And I don't want to give someone a wrong answer. If someone comes in with a 1x31 Pokemon that is 1x31 in attack, for example, but then they don't tell me that it's a Pokemon they caught in 2012, well, that Pokemon goes from being worth a few K to now 200,000 Pokeyen or even 500,000 Pokeyen, or maybe they have a 2012 Pokemon that's 1x31 attack and it's in the monster egg group, but it's like a Charizard from 2012 or something like that. And all of a sudden, your Pokemon's value goes up tremendously. Like, it really depends on so many factors. Once again, low floor for the basics, extremely high ceiling for the complicated stuff. Tip number 20 is to not sell your first OT shiny within PokeMMO, unless you really want to. But my biggest piece of advice here is to just sit on it. Wait on it, wait a week on it. It's a very common situation in PokeMMO where players will encounter their first shiny. They weren't really going for that shiny Pokemon. They just randomly encountered it, and all of a sudden they're a new player and they're enticed. They could sell this Pokemon for 2 million Pokeyen. Well, as a new player, 2 million, 3 million, 4 million Pokeyen, that seems like so much. But as you play the game, you come to understand 2 to 4 million Pokeyen can be easily achieved within a few tens of hours, whereas shiny Pokemon are much harder, much more difficult to achieve, and much more out of your control. And your first OT shiny is also something so special. I always go on to say that 99.9% of players who sell their first OT shiny go on to regret it, unfortunately. So all I can do is encourage you to not sell it. Wait on it for a week or two. You know, it's not going to go down in value after a week or two, and just see if you really want to sell it. There is a specific type of person who genuinely doesn't care about shinies and won't regret it, who maybe should sell their OT shiny, but that person is kind of rare. Most people develop those emotional connections and attachments to those Pokemon, but only realize it later on after it's gone. At the end of the day, I'm just here to teach you the information and education, and that I want you to make your own decisions. If selling your OT shiny truly is the best decision for you, then I absolutely want you to do it, but I strongly encourage players to just sit and really think about it. Tip number 21 is that farming Pokemon in the Safari Zone is extremely cheap and a good way to farm up some good Pokemon, or farm up some Pokeyen. It's 500 Pokeyen to enter each Safari Zone within whatever region you're in, and you can sit here and farm Pokemon for quite a while with 30 Pokeballs. Pokeballs outside of the Safari Zone cost 200 Pokeyen each, and in the Safari Zone, you're paying 500 for 30 of them, so even if you catch 3 Pokemon, that already outweighs the cost of if you were catching them outside of the Safari Zone. Now, obviously, the trick is you get to catch less Pokemon less consistently in Safari Zone since they can run, and Arceus forbid you find a shiny in the Safari Zone. Unless you catch it, then you're a god gamer. But something like a male Nidorino, for example, it's so good to go ahead and catch these in mass, and they're in the Monster Egg group. If you end up with like a 31 attack or 31 HP or any sort of good IVs on a Nidorino catch like this, you could make some really good Pokeyen for really low investment as a new player. This is one of my go-to money-making methods when I'm doing a from-scratch challenge on a new account or alt account. Yo, what's up? It's Patrouski, and I hope you don't mind me interrupting your video just for a minute or two for a really important sponsorship today. You see, this is not a collaboration between me and some giant corporation or company. This is a collaboration between me and a friend, a fellow gamer, and a fellow PokeMMO community member, Shadow, aka PokeMMO Investments. You see, Shadow has been tirelessly at work creating and building his own online TCG store. And if you're like myself, whose love for Pokemon doesn't stop at the games or even PokeMMO, it transcends to the card games, whether in English or Japanese, whether opening sealed product or buying singles for your collection, then Shadow's shop, Sets, Singles, and SIRs might be the place for you. Please don't ask me how many takes that took. But because Shadow and me are good friends, we've been able to work out a deal together. A deal for you guys, where anyone who places a new order on Shadow's website within the month of March will receive 2 free Japanese packs. That is with every single order. But that's only in the month of March. Usually, it's 1 free pack on orders over $35, which is already pretty nice. A free pack just for buying cards or packs you were already going to buy, and at really good prices. I've been buying trading cards for over a decade now. I've used TCG Player, Card Kingdom, I've bought and sold, I've done physical shops, I've done a little bit of everything, and I can confirm that Shadow's prices are more than fair. His shop mostly specializes in Pokemon packs, but does offer some Magic the Gathering packs for people like myself. Sets, Singles, and SIRs does even specialize in Japanese Pokemon packs specifically, because they have the same beautiful art as English cards, but with higher quality card stock a lot of the time, and with guaranteed hit rates in each box, unlike English boxes. So if you want to collect some beautiful cards on a little bit of a budget, Japanese packs are the way to go. And I haven't even mentioned the stickers, which I've now used to pimp out my side TV over here. My personal favorite is definitely the Angie Torchic. There's also a really cute little Eevee I wasn't able to fit on my TV. Eevee on the TV. Wow, I really missed a good chance at a joke there. Maybe I should find space. Once again, link in the description, join the mailing list, order some cards, get free packs, get free stickers, win, 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 profit. The more people that sign up for the mailing list, the more a friend of ours can grow his business, and the more dope offers he can supply to us. It is truly a win-win-win. Shadow is so dedicated to giving people a good deal on their orders that they will eat all shipping costs even if you were to order something like 20 boxes. It's a flat rate, so they're not going to overcharge you for something like that. He truly just wants you to have a good experience and enjoy a hobby that he enjoys, which sounds exactly like what I do on this channel. And I think supporting like-minded individuals while also helping ourselves is one of the most beautiful things we can do on this planet. So what are you doing? Pause the video, go check out the website linked in the description. Once again, join the mailing list, order some cards, and afterwards you can enjoy the rest of the video. Thank you for watching. Thanks for checking it out, and let's get back to it. Tip number 22, something that is not used nearly enough in PokeMMO is PvP statistics. In the bottom right hand corner of your screen, you can directly go over and see the metagame breakdown for PvP in each of the tiers in PokeMMO. If you're interested in learning PvP or getting into the metagame, this is obviously very powerful and very helpful. But even if you're not, it's also very helpful and important for any player who wants to make Pokeyen, which is pretty much every type of player. I always talk about one of the best ways to make Pokeyen in PokeMMO is to understand what Pokemon are hot, what Pokemon are really in high demand right now. And when a Pokemon changes PvP tiers, or if it's just really, really high in the tier and really powerful, has really high demand like Hitmontop in NU, you can usually make some really good profit either catching these Pokemon or breeding them for profit. Every type of player, no matter what you do in the game, probably should be checking PvP statistics every week or so. Tip number 23 is to learn EV training. EV training is something to do if you're stuck in the storyline. It's really, really powerful to go ahead and specifically put certain stats within a certain Pokemon to help you overcome the Elite Four or a certain trainer, as well as just making Pokeyen. If you've completed a few storylines and you want to make some Pokeyen, buying good Pokemon to EV train and then later XP train and then sell as competitive Pokemon or good PVM Pokemon for raids or things like that can be really, really good Pokeyen for new players. And all you have to do is put in the time and effort. Anybody can do EV training. You might have to learn a little bit about certain Pokemon though. So for example, let me explain what EV training is and what EVs are. We talked about IVs earlier and how they're sort of the DNA of your Pokemon. EVs are sort of what you do to adjust that. So EVs are kind of like going to the gym, right? If IVs are your genetics, your EVs are how hard you work, how hard you go to the gym and actually pump your muscles to try to train. So let's go ahead and do some EV training. What we would do here is I want some attack EVs on my Donphan. I would go online and look for attack EV training spots in PokeMMO or look up an EV training guide, and I would go ahead and find out that over in Unova, there's a really good Bouffalont EV training spot to the north of Oplucid City. This is a really good spot because it's a good spot for whatever point you're at in the game, as well as if you're right before the Elite Four and you want to EV train a Pokemon in physical attack to help them get stronger. It's just the perfect spot. It's really nice. So we're going to jump into this and show that my Donphan currently has 0 attack EVs. Now, specific Pokemon essentially give specific EVs. So if we head over to the Pokedex, we can go ahead and see that Bouffalont, upon defeating, will give you +2 attack EVs. However, there's 5 Bouffalonts in this horde, so if I defeat them all in one move, one AoE move, area of effect move like Earthquake, I'm actually going to get 10 EVs for one battle, which is then going to give me 10 attack EVs on this Donphan. You can have a total of up to 252 EVs in one stat and a total of 510 EVs in total. So generally you go for 252 in 2 different stats. On this Donphan, I would just do like attack and speed, and then put the leftover EVs in something else. The leftover EVs are really only going to raise that extra stat up by 1. So it's not super important, but maybe you go for like HP on something like a Donphan. This is also where XP shares become super important. If I go ahead and plop an XP share over on this Druddigon, which is another really good Pokemon that needs to be EV trained, I can go ahead, do the same thing, jump into this horde, and upon defeating it, not only will I get EVs on my Donphan, but I'll also get EVs on my Druddigon. You can actually get EVs on however many Pokemon you have XP shares on. So if I had 5 Pokemon here, all with XP shares, then I could go ahead and essentially EV train that many Pokemon at once. Now, you do need to make sure you have a Pokemon with Sweet Scent in your party while you're doing this. So you can use things like a Pikachu with Sweet Scent and then Discharge and Surf, but that's getting a little more towards endgame hyper efficiency. If you're a newer player, just try to EV train 2 to 4 Pokemon at once, or as many as you possibly can. If you're only EV training 1 Pokemon at a time, that is totally okay. Understanding what Pokemon need what EVs does become kind of complicated and is once again kind of a game knowledge thing, but one of the easiest ways to check is just what their base stats are. I can see that this Druddigon has 120 attack. That probably means this thing wants attack EVs. That's not always the case, but it's a good beginner metric. This is less so something to do and more so of just a pure tip, but tip number 4 is to keep in mind, and I already mentioned it earlier, but when you're doing the Elite Four for the storyline, every time you defeat a member, your party does fully heal. I feel like this is super crucial knowledge to know when attempting to beat your Elite Fours, and I feel like it totally changes the way that you play the fights, and the game doesn't tell you this, so I feel like it is deserving of its own slot. Tip number 25 is that during the storylines, nowadays in PokeMMO, you can only use 4 items per NPC/trainer battle. This includes Elite Four members and gym leaders. You can actually see over on the top right here, it says 4 items remaining. This was done to prevent players from just revive spamming and using things like Rocky Helmet and Aftermath to be able to beat whatever trainers they wanted to with pure items. It makes things a lot more skill-based. Tip number 26 is that many items are changed within PokeMMO for the sake of the economy, but some of the biggest examples are things like Amulet Coin, which is a consumable, and upon use, it boosts your Pokeyen gained from trainers by 1.5 times or 50% for 1 hour. And then you have things like Lucky Eggs, which have also been turned into consumables, which doubles the rate of your XP gain for an hour. And that brings us to tip number 27, which is one of the most important, but also one of the most convoluted, to learn the breeding system within PokeMMO, which is one of the most powerful and genius things about the game, but it's also very off-putting for new players, and for a good reason. It consumes your Pokemon upon breeding. The general idea is that you consume 2 decent Pokemon to create 1 good Pokemon while consuming some Pokeyen and sinking good IV Pokemon out of the game, stabilizing the economy and allowing the game to truly exist in the first place. A MMO cannot exist without a good, strong economy. I strongly encourage you checking out my breeding guide linked in the description for more information before attempting your own breeds. Breeding for profit is honestly how I make most of my Pokeyen at endgame. I usually make around 300 to 600,000 Pokeyen within around 30 minutes consistently. But that also comes from thousands of hours of game knowledge and years of understanding, following trends, and understanding what's hot and what's going on currently in the game. Very similar to price checking, breeding for profit has a very low floor but an extremely high skill ceiling. Tip number 28 is that you get free BP for defeating each of the Elite Fours in PokeMMO. BP is an alternative currency that can be used to buy really powerful items like Choice Bands, Choice Specs, Toxic Orbs, and Rocky Helmets. The 2 main places to spend your BP are over at the Battle Frontier in Hoenn, or alternatively over in Nimbasa City in Unova. If you head over to the little railway track, the train station, and then head down here, there is a BP shop over here where you can spend your PP on certain things. Tip number 29 is that many Pokeballs are balanced differently in PokeMMO compared to traditional games. For example, Netball doesn't work against targets that have been turned into water types, for example via Ditto transformation or via the move Soak. Another really good example is Repeat Balls. Repeat Balls just work entirely differently in kind of a complicated way, where essentially the more of the same species of Pokemon that you catch in a row, you get 0.1 added to the catch rate, and you can go from 1.0 catch rate, which is Pokeball, all the way up to a 2.5 times catch rate, which is greater than an Ultra Ball. But that's only if you catch the same species of Pokemon in a row. Making Repeat Balls really good for consistent specific farming, but not good as sort of a catch-all Pokeball. This information is super important to know when you're purchasing your Pokeballs, like I talked about, from the Pokemarts or the shopping malls around the world. Now, most of these Pokeballs will have their change mechanics in the description of the item, so always make sure to read them. Next up, fashion is a very important part of PokeMMO Endgame. This is tip number 30. Head over to your customization tab and just sort through what vanities you may or may not have. Don't be afraid to spend some Pokeyen on that drip. That can also be used as an investment if you spend your Pokeyen wisely. Getting drippy in PokeMMO is absolutely half the fun, as it is with most MMOs. Fashion scape will always be important. Tip number 31 is that there are a ton of community events held within PokeMMO every single week. There's usually around 3 to 4 catch events within PokeMMO every single week, with all of their information being found over on the PokeMMO forums under official events or even unofficial events. Here's an example of a catching event where you can go ahead and win yourself a prize of a shiny Dratini simply for showing up and trying to catch the best Pokemon. I feel like catch events are super underappreciated and under talked about by the community at large. There's also daily PvP tournaments. If you head over to tournament sign up, for example, there's an OU tournament that starts in about 21 hours. If I go over to tournament history, I can see the previous tournaments that have already happened. So for example, there was already a tournament today, already an OU tournament, where the winner of that tournament was gifted a perfect Gastrodon with 6x31 IVs. And 1,000 reward points earned for free just from playing the game. If you happen to not know, reward points are the premium currency in PokeMMO found over in the gift shop. You can also buy RP over with RP vouchers in the GTL though, which is what I normally do. Now, beyond catch events and PvP tournaments, there are often even fashion contests and shiny ratings. Make sure to check out the PokeMMO events forum page to get more involved if you're looking for something to do within the game. Tip number 32 is to join a team in PokeMMO. Joining a team is one of the best ways to take the game to the next level, but make sure you try to find the right team for you, and the method that you use to look for a team will impact what kind of team you find. I do have a video on how to join a team in PokeMMO linked in the description. Tip number 33 is that following what Pokemon change PvP tiers is crucial for not only PvP players, but for all moneymakers as well. When something like Lucario goes from OU to UU, all of a sudden, now UU players now want to test out this powerful new Pokemon in their tier. This is once again information that can be found over on the PokeMMO forums. We can actually go see what Pokemon were moved in February of 2025 as of right now. I also try to make videos whenever these PvP tier changes happen, which happen every single month. So make sure to subscribe and ring that bell notification if you don't want to miss information like that. Tip number 34, in my personal opinion, randoms PvP is the best way to learn PokeMMO PvP and get into PvP in my personal opinion. Randoms PvP requires you to own no competitive Pokemon or items. You simply can queue up 4 randoms when you get 4 gym badges. Keep in mind, randoms is a very different game from traditional Pokemon PvP. There's some extra RNG with what team you get, alongside extra strategy with things like concealing information and guessing what types and movesets your opponents might have. The best way to play randoms, in my opinion, or just getting into PvP in general in PokeMMO, is trying not to worry about winning or losing and just have fun. And try to learn at least one thing, acknowledge one mistake that you could have done better in each game. Getting into PokeMMO PvP is really, really difficult. Players are very, very good on average. And you're definitely going to have to be okay with losing to get into it. Now, obviously, keep in mind, some of the knowledge and information you learn from randoms isn't going to transition well over to things like OU, but it's a really good starting point in the fact that it's totally free to just head over to matchmaking sign up and just queue up for randoms ranked PvP. Almost never queue for casual. You should almost always queue for ranked. There's no harm in losing, and you just win prizes along the way. The fact that you can just do this at 4 gym badges with 0 Pokemon and just learn and have fun and play is just amazing for players. Tip number 35 is that you can also earn free PvP Pokemon by simply playing PvP. You can check this out over in the matchmaking sign up, and then heading over to personal stats, you can see the rewards over here. Every single 2 weeks, if you play enough games and get enough wins within each tier, you can get a free competitive Pokemon in each tier if you play enough PvP. In OU right now, the free Pokemon is Scizor. Over in randoms, you can earn yourself a Lantern, and NU could get yourself a competitive Quillfish. In UU, you get a competitive Crobat, and so on and so on. If you just start playing PvP via randoms, that means you can build an entire PvP team from scratch for free just by playing PvP. You can genuinely be a PvP one-trick account if you want to. Tip number 36 is that payday pickup is a really solid way to make some extra Pokeyen if you're a newer player. Making sure to pick up a decent Meowth with the payday move, which essentially does a 40 base power normal type physical attack and also gives you Pokeyen when you defeat the Pokemon in the wild, or even against a trainer, is really nice. The extra little Pokeyen does add up. Or you can just do straight up payday pickup farming. Now, payday obviously refers to the payday move, but what is pickup? Pickup gives you a chance to pick up items when defeating wild Pokemon. So if I payday this Dragonair, there's a chance I could pick up something like a Dragon Scale or even a Comet Shard, which should be worth like 12k or so. We'll see if we get anything here. It's only a small chance, but there we go. Nothing extra there that time, but payday pickupping is really important. Having that pickup move is really important. When you're payday pickup farming, that pickup ability is going to represent about 50% of your Pokeyen profit per hour. So if you're paydaying with a Persian, for example, which loses the pickup ability, you're essentially losing out on 50% of your Pokeyen. That's a lot of Pokeyen. So make sure to use a Meowth if you're doing this farming method, which is why it's really important to not evolve them a lot of the times in PokeMMO. Now, you can payday pickup alongside your storyline for that extra little bit of cash, or do some really brain dead AFK, payday pickuping at endgame or mid game. I don't really recommend payday pickuping, but it is kind of the lowest level, most brain dead farming you can do. If you want to just turn your brain off, play PokeMMO hard in the background, watch a movie, watch an anime, you can go ahead and payday pickup. I usually recommend other activities like catching Dittos, but hey, if you enjoy it, you'll make some decent Pokeyen and some decent progress along the way. Tip number 37 is talking about HM arenas. These are items that allow you to use HMs without having a Pokemon in your party that knows the move. Probably one of the number one questions / comments I get on my videos. Hey, how did you use the fly move without an actual flying type Pokemon in your party? And it's almost always with these ocarinas. Ocarinas are not required by any means. They're kind of expensive, usually being around 500,000 Pokeyen a piece, and they really represent paying for convenience. But if you're going to pick up a few ocarinas, I strongly recommend Fly, Teleport, and Surf are probably the top 3 most important ocarinas if you want to pick up a few. You don't need all of them like I have. This is just for collection purposes at this point. Tip number 38, kind of obvious, but a lot of players will neglect it for a little bit. Make sure to use your hotkey bar. It's one of the most MMO parts about PokeMMO, and it's a huge time save during your PokeMMO adventures. Having things like Sweet Scent, Fly, Teleport, I have lures over here, Repels, Dig, my Super Rod, my Bike, things like this. Hotkeyed is so important for quick maneuverability and just getting through the game faster and making more progress. Oh boy, it's time for tip number 39, which is about legends and mythicals in PokeMMO. Legends and mythicals are very complicated in PokeMMO. You can actually probably have seen my Darkrai throughout the making of this video. I'm only going to be able to own him for another minute or so, and that's a lot to explain right now, but let's go ahead and try to get started. At the time of making this video, there are currently over 5 different ways to achieve legendaries within PokeMMO. Some are temporarily ownable in a King of the Hill style minigame where people can fight you and you're forced to accept PvP duels and they can take you from them in the wild. Things like Rayquaza, things like Lugia, things like Mewtwo, and some are permanently ownable like Zapdos, Entei, Suicune, and Raikou, and these are called roaming legendaries, which are legendary Pokemon you can get from roaming around in the grass until you find them after defeating the said storylines. And then on top of that, there are some legendaries like Heatran, which are permanently ownable, but only achievable from high-level raids. You have to complete the Pokedex and then get a very, very, very strong PVM team, coordinate with 3 other people, and get through an extremely difficult fight to even get the chance to unlock the ability to catch Heatran. And then on top of it, there's Uber tier Pokemon like Darkrai, which are only temporarily ownable via something called a Summoning Orb. Now, Darkrai is currently, at the time of recording, the only Pokemon that exists in this form, and it wasn't exactly popular when it was released. But this is a way for the PokeMMO devs to add Uber tier Pokemon without breaking the raids metagame, the PVM metagame, let alone the PvP metagame. People always give the common argument of just add every Pokemon and ban them in PvP, but with a game like PokeMMO, that doesn't solve the problems. You have PVM, you have Battle Frontier, you have raids, you have future content that is yet to exist. Legendaries have to be balanced around everything, and Uber tier legendaries and legendaries in general weren't balanced in traditional Pokemon. They didn't really care about it. They were a children's game for fun, but in an MMO, it's a lot more serious, and there's a lot more things that can be broken when you have an economy entwined. Legendaries are complicated and one of the hardest things to explain in PokeMMO. There should be plenty of guides about them linked in the description, like how to get them, with them explained, different methods, different spots and locations to catch them. Once again, you may have to do a little bit more research other than just this video, but I hope this covered the basics. Tip number 40 is that alpha swarms are a mechanic within PokeMMO where something called an alpha Pokemon spawns on the map and you can go fight it and catch it for guaranteed good IVs, on top of the Pokemon having hidden ability access, which is the main way that hidden abilities are added to PokeMMO is via these alpha swarms. You can find much more info linked in the description in a video called Alphas Explained. Fun fact, alphas have a little red glow around them, but they can also be shiny, and when you get a shiny alpha, or aka a shalfa, it ends up with a beautiful yellow glow. These are some of the most wanted, desired, and beautiful shinies within PokeMMO. Tip number 41 is that event season is a very powerful thing in PokeMMO. Event season lasts from around October to February, and it's called event season because in a very short time frame, we usually get the 3 main annual events within PokeMMO, plus major game-changing updates alongside them. These events consist of a Halloween event, a Christmas or winter-themed event, and then a Lunar New Year event. These events usually drop on the holiday, so Halloween is on October 31st, Christmas is on December 25th, and then the Lunar New Year event is wherever that falls that year. Whenever events are active, it's usually the best Pokeyen per hour in the game, and also one of the best time to make investments or make some really good, powerful PVM Pokemon. For tip number 42, I touched on it vaguely earlier, but it is more deserving of its own spot. The shiny rate in PokeMMO is 1 out of 30,000. This makes PokeMMO the hardest game for shiny hunting in all of Pokemon from my understanding, but also the most rewarding for those who are willing to conquer those odds. To add to this, there's also a website called PokeMMO Zone with a player and team OT shiny leaderboard where you can scroll through and see how you stack up against the other players and where you rank in terms of how many shinies you have. I am currently ranked 100 based on this unofficial leaderboard in the game for how many OT shinies I have. Keep in mind, this is an unofficial leaderboard that does not house every single player in the game, so it's not exactly, law and everything to understand when it comes to shunting. It does not track solo players. You have to actually be in a team. The way this scrapes the data is it goes over to the PokeMMO forums and takes all of the team shiny showcases. So if you're not in a team or your team doesn't do a shiny showcase, your information might not be here. And I encourage you to join a team or have a team put up a shiny showcase to have all of your stuff tracked and logged so you can see where you stack up. I think encouraging this shiny leaderboard and drawing more attention to it is the next step for serious competitive shiny hunting within PokeMMO. And staying on the same vein of PokeMMO websites, for tip number 43, there's a PokeMMO tools website called PokeMMO Hub, which contains a ton of tools for new and veteran players alike. You could plan out your drip or fashionscape with the cosmetic helper, or just use it to discover what vanities even exist in the game in the first place. Although the most powerful tool, in my opinion, is the market tracker, which shows you the price history of all market items since the creation of the website. This is crucial for people trying to track the Pokemon market and make smart investments, which you can also track over in your own investments page. If you make an account, you can see your percentage gain, you can see your net worth on a specific amount of investments, you can log all of your investments, or for example, these are just the investments that I made recently in the final event of the Pokemon event season. Tip number 43 is that you'll often see players in global chats or other chats in Pokemon with the CM tag that you see on screen there. Obviously, it won't be that large, but these are community managers. These are players who are often more than willing to help new players with trade evolutions, or you can ask them quick, simple questions, but please be polite and understand that they don't owe you their time. They are just kind players who go above and beyond to help new players. Tip number 45 is that scamming is against the rules in PokeMMO, so it is highly unlikely someone will try to scam you for a storyline Kadabra or something of that nature at the risk of their entire account. But if this does happen to you, or you want to protect yourself against scamming, make sure that when you trade someone, you want to go ahead and whisper them and get chat confirmation, saying something like, "Hey, I'm trading you for my Kadabra just to evolve, right?" And then don't actually go through with the trade until they say correct or yes in response. Chat logs are really powerful evidence in a he said, she said scamming situation. Once again, it is kind of unlikely unless you're doing some sort of trust trade with a friend for a rare shiny, but just don't do that. And for tip number 46, speaking of trade evolutions, some typical trade evolution Pokemon don't actually even need to be traded to be evolved. In PokeMMO, any Pokemon that relies on an item, something like a Scyther with Metal Coat, usually you would have to give the Metal Coat to the Pokemon and then trade to get it to evolve. Here, we can actually just go ahead and click use on the Metal Coat on the Scyther, and it will just straight up go ahead and evolve it, taking the risk out of that trust Evo trade. Tip number 47 is that the chat system in PokeMMO is a little old school. You kind of have to switch around to different chats, which also might include you changing your chat tab settings, which I strongly recommend you exploring by hitting the little gear option down here. You'll have to create different chats that show different chats, like normal chat, which is sort of the local chat, the people that are around you, your whispers, which are of course DMs, global chat, which is of course global chat, team chat, which is of course team chat, system announcements. This could be things like upcoming catch events or certain things, just, oh, the servers are shutting down for an update, and then system messages, which could include things like your Pokemon selling on the GTL, or your evolutions or GTL purchases, things like that. Your battle log is going to be, I strongly recommend all players having a battle log. That's going to be your percentage of damage in fights. It's going to be what's happened, how much Pokeyen you've gained. Sometimes a glitch or a bug may occur, or just seeing what happened in the fight is really, really important. I think every person should have a battle log, which is just your battle chat, just sort of in its own chat, and then nothing else to distract from it. And then you have all sorts of other things, which once again, I recommend you just kind of testing out with, but you also have to click this little thing down in the bottom left-hand corner to actually make sure you're chatting in the right chat room. I can go look at team chat, but then if I type, I'm going to accidentally type in link chat. I can go to my whispers, but unless I actually go to my whispers and select who I want to talk to by double clicking a name or something like that, I'm not actually going to respond to them. So learning that you can look at a chat without necessarily typing in it is kind of a mental barrier for a lot of players to overcome when learning the chat system in PokeMMO. And speaking about the chat system, tip number 48 is about trade chat and how sometimes it's important to buy and sell some items and some Pokemon off of the GTL to save some extra Pokeyen by avoiding the listing fee of the GTL. This includes things like Lepa berries and Ditto boxes, or any sort of Pokemon boxes. Pokemon boxes, or more importantly, Ditto boxes, which is the most, common one, are essentially just a box of 60 bad IV Pokemon that certain high-level shiny hunters will buy to mass breed all at once for a chance at a rare shiny. Things like shiny Metagross and shiny Charizard are brought into the game via these Ditto boxes and via rare shunting. Not all Pokemon are valuable as a box, but the most common and most important ones are usually things like Ditto boxes, Monster Male Egg Group boxes, and then Fairy Male Egg Group boxes. You can usually tell which Pokemon or which egg group would make a good box by what their value is over on the GTL and why they're being purchased in the first place. You can see the cheapest male fairy egg group Pokemon is around 3,000 Pokeyen, and the reason why is that people are using these to shiny hunt for Chansey. Chansey is a female-only species in the fairy egg group, so you can essentially buy 30,000, 30,000 Chanseys and 30,000 male fairy egg group Pokemon and breed them over and over and over again, and eventually you should end up with a shiny Chansey. This is very expensive and takes an extremely long time, but is also the best way to shiny hunt for a Chansey. For these boxes of Pokemon to have value, they usually do all have to be a box of males for something that a shiny hunter can actually breed without overwriting the species of the shiny Pokemon they're hunting for, since female Pokemon decide the species that the egg will actually come out as. If this sounds confusing, don't worry. You don't need to understand every detail as a new player. You have plenty of time to learn, and PokeMMO is a game that takes time. And this is true for a lot of the tips we've covered today. In short, it's important for new players to remember that certain Pokemon, no matter the IVs, have value. A Ditto, for example, at the time of recording, is worth around 5,000 Pokeyen, regardless of the IVs. You want to keep these Pokemon, and you want to sell them and get your Pokeyen. And then carrying off of the last tip for tip number 49, Ditto farming is a really good, consistent, and beginner-friendly money-making method. I recommend doing this either over in Hoenn or Johto. I showed the location really quickly over here in Hoenn. It's left of Falibur Town. You do have to have the storyline complete to access this location. This is normally done at the moment with a Safety Goggles Smeargle with False Swipe and Spore. This is at least a good starting spot or a good starting Pokemon. You can upgrade to other strategies, but this will do you absolutely solidly. And the fight looks something like this. You'll go ahead and false swipe the Pokemon. It'll transform into your Smeargle. You want to go ahead and spore it. The reason you want Safety Goggles is so that it can't spore you back if it outspeeds you in the speed tie, and that really elongates the fight and makes things super, super annoying. And then generally the best Pokeball used right now is Dust Ball, well, at least for the first 15 catches. What normally you do for Dittos right now is catching 15 Dittos in a row with Dust Ball, and then switching over to that Repeat Ball that we talked about. It's the same catch rate after you catch 15 in a row, but it's 100 Pokeyen less per ball. And there we go. We caught this Ditto on the first ball. That Dust Ball did cost us around 1,200 Pokeyen, or 1,300 or so, but this Ditto is worth 5k or so. So we're profiting about 4,000 Pokeyen, if not more, per Ditto, regardless of the IVs. And once again, calling back to selling Pokemon as boxes, it's super important. If I were to go sell this Ditto on the GTL, I'd be selling it for around 5,000 Pokeyen, but I'd lose 1,000 Pokeyen to essentially taxes, to the GTL listing fee. But if I go sell this to a player for, let's say, 4,500 Pokeyen, I'm making 500 more Pokeyen than I would have otherwise, and the buyer of the Ditto box is saving 500 Pokeyen per Ditto. That's normally how I price check my Ditto boxes and my Pokemon boxes in general. I go ahead and I take the going market rate, which for Dittos at this point is around 5,100 to 5,000. Since there's so few ones listed for 5k, they're kind of disappearing. You'd probably assume that, you know what, the average cost is actually closer to around 5,100, 5,200. Ditto box pricing and sort of pricing these Pokemon boxes is up to interpretation. It's up to whatever you're willing to sell it for and whatever the buyer is willing to pay. But I would personally do 5,100, subtract 500, and then take that number and multiply it by 60, which is how many Dittos are in a box, and that gives us around a 280k number. So a fair price based on this market value, in my opinion, would be around 280,000 Pokeyen for a Ditto box. So if you sell Dittos in a box like that, you would make around 280k Pokeyen per box. But if I sold them on the GTL, I would actually only be making 220,000 Pokeyen per 60 Dittos. That is a massive difference per box. Losing out on 60k profit per 60 Pokemon caught is ridiculous, and you want to make sure to get your full value. You can buy and sell Ditto boxes in my Discord under the Ditto box trading chat room, or using the forums, or using trade chat. But I do swear by my Discord, and I can't even really take credit for it. My Discord is what you guys make of it. The community really makes my Discord what it is. I honestly do very little there. The people there are what make it such an incredible place. And if you're buying and selling Ditto boxes in my Discord, you're on average less likely having to worry about scams or slow traders or anything like that. The people there are a little bit more serious. They care about the game. You know, if you've taken the time to pursue a YouTube video or pursue a Discord around the game, you're probably taking a little bit more seriously. So I recommend, that's where I buy my Ditto boxes, is from the people in my own Discord. Tip number 50. Next up, I want to talk about particle effects. Particle effects in PokeMMO are an extra little customization element in PokeMMO where when you defeat certain bosses during certain events or buying certain items off the GTL, you can just look up like particle on the GTL and see all the different particle effects. Particle effects just add an extra little animation to your Pokemon. So for example, this is the Kanto Friends particle effect on an Alpha Charizard. So I can show you what that looks like, which plays a little cool animation throwing out all the 3 Kanto starter Pokemon upon battle entry. You can see it's what all these 3 little Pokeballs are, which is just a nice little extra, once again, flair or flex in PokeMMO. Now, there's tons of particles like this, so it's definitely worth running around and trying to see what your favorites are. I'll show you guys one more. This is the Eerie Howl particle effect, which came from Halloween 2021. You'll see a lot of these exclusive ones, which came from events. The Kanto Friends one came from the 10-year anniversary event in PokeMMO, for example. It's important to note that the shiny particle effect is also considered a particle effect. A shiny Pokemon is essentially just a Pokemon with a different color scheme and the shiny particle effect. And you can also turn on and off these particle effects by clicking the little icon there. Particle effects, to my knowledge, don't actually add extra time to the battle. It was theorized that it did a few years ago, but we've seemed to test it by now, and it does not, from my understanding. So don't worry about being inefficient. The little animation playing doesn't actually add extra time to your fight. But with the shiny particle, for example, I can go ahead and have it turned on and obviously get the whole shebang where I get the shiny noise and the shiny sound effect and the particle playing out just like this. Or if I want to, let's see really quick. That's what a normal shiny looks like, of course. Or I could go ahead and turn it off if I want to shiny hunt with a shiny Pokemon, or EV train or XP train, so I don't constantly get jump scared that I'm encountering a wild shiny Pokemon when actually it's just my own shiny. This is a really important thing to know. A lot of players may not know this, but you can click the particle effects, as we can see there, to go ahead and turn it off. Next up, for tip number 51, we get to discuss one of the most powerful new items that have been added to PokeMMO, which is the expert lures, or the lures in general. Expert lures are one of the most powerful items to use whenever you're single encountering, shiny hunting, legendary hunting, or even sometimes if you're just catching Pokemon for profit. They do cost 15,000 Pokeyen per hour, but that amount is negligible compared to the benefit they give. They are essentially reverse repels that give you increased encounter odds, plus give you the ability to encounter rare species like starter Pokemon or Metagross in the wild. For example, this is one of the best shiny hunting single encounter locations in PokeMMO, and what makes it so good is you can encounter things like Mr. Mime and things like Breloom in the same location using lures. You get to encounter extra rare Pokemon here if you pop lures. The same can be said for things like Squirtle and other starter Pokemon like I mentioned. These are only encounterable in the wild if you pop lures. These lures can be purchased from all the Pokemarts around the game, but I strongly recommend sticking to the normal lures, the expert line of lures. I strongly don't encourage you to use things like premium lures or legendary lures. These things are way overpriced for the benefits they actually give you, usually costing you anywhere from 400,000 to 600,000 Pokeyen per hour, which is just ludicrously expensive for the benefits they actually give. Stay away from them, in my personal opinion. Onto another new and powerful item, which is going to be XP candies. XP candies are super powerful, but they're very expensive, usually costing at least around 5,000 Pokeyen a piece for a little bit of XP, and get, more and more expensive the more XP they offer. But sometimes in the right situation, they can be exactly what you need. If you don't want to use like a ton of rare candies, you can go ahead and use a few XP candies in the early game during storyline runs, or if you need to level up some raid Pokemon to a specific point in a pinch. You get XP candy from defeating or catching Alpha Swarms, as well as from sealed product like Lucky Reds or Red Envelope during events in event season. But like any item on this list, the best way to get them is just to buy them off the GTL instead of trying to self-farm them. Remember, the game is an MMO, it's important to treat it like one. Tip 53 is an exciting one for me personally. There are raids in PokeMMO. You see, raids are a piece of PokeMMO endgame PVM content that at the time of recording are still in beta testing, but should eventually be added permanently to the game. Currently, you can only do them during events, so right now, the raid dens around the world are sitting dormant. Raids currently consist of 4 players versus 1 supercharged raid boss Pokemon that also summons 2 other Pokemon to its aid. These fights often require really good strategy and really good Pokemon that you spent time really fostering to specifically beat these specific raids. I cannot wait for permanent raids to finally be released, as it will probably be the most important update PokeMMO has ever received. A permanently grindable and repeatable piece of endgame PVM content for all players. Tip number 54 is a doozy. In PokeMMO, if you breed 2 shiny Pokemon together, the baby will guaranteed come out shiny 100% of the time. So, with this method, you can actually breed up your OT shinies into competitive monsters. Now, shiny breeding is very expensive and can be very dangerous, so please check out my guide linked in the description if you haven't before you ever attempt a shiny breed. And also keep in mind, you cannot fake an OT shiny in PokeMMO that you have not earned. So for example, if you try to just buy 2 shinies off the GTL and breed them together, they will come out unknown OT. Which is why you might see so many of those on the GTL. Sometimes I get new players asking like, wow, who is unknown OT? He has so many shinies, which is honestly a very fair conclusion to come to. But no, this is just the result of someone usually breeding up shinies for profit to sell. The same is also true if you try to buy a female shiny Lucario, for example, and breed that with a shiny OT Ditto of your own. That will come out as unknown OT because you never actually had an OT shiny Lucario. And finally, I strongly encourage players to not breed 2 OT shinies together. I see that mistake a lot, and it's almost never ever worth it. Just saving up some Pokeyen to buy the perfect breeder off the GTL for your shiny is number 1 going to save you time, save you energy, and save you Pokeyen. In terms of efficiency, it is literally never worth it to breed your 2 OT shiny Pokemon together, unless you really want to at the end of the day, obviously, if it makes you happy. But once again, I urge you to check out the guide. It is really easy to make a mistake and lose OT on your shiny, which is something you never ever want to have happen. Tip number 55 is one of my favorite to tell new players, is that completing the Pokedex is actually one of the most powerful things you can do in PokeMMO. Now, completing your Pokedex means getting caught OT on all Pokemon that aren't legendaries or mythicals. So, for example, I actually have Heatran over here owned OT. That is not needed to complete the Pokedex, as are things like Darkrai. You don't need legendaries or mythicals, but other than that, everything is needed to be caught OT to complete your Pokedex. Completing your Pokedex is so good because it unlocks the best XP training spot in the game. It unlocks Mount Silver, which gives you the best XP training spot, some of the best EV training spots. It gives you an Alpha Tyranitar static spawn, which is really good Pokeyen, worth around 500,000 Pokeyen at a base level. It also gives you one of the best moneymakers in the game with the Red Refight. It also gives you one of the best shiny hunting locations for one of the coolest shinies in Shiny Larvitar/Tyranitar. You also get an ability patch in each region, which are worth around 100 to 300k a piece. Times that by 5, now you're making some decent Pokeyen. It also unlocks the ability to do the Heatran raid fight. I cannot stress enough how powerful completing the Pokedex is in PokeMMO, and it's truly one of the major steps to endgame, which I absolutely love, because growing up playing Pokemon, the whole motto was you gotta catch them all. And you and I both know that the Pokemon franchise has kind of moved away from that now. But I absolutely love that in PokeMMO, gotta catch them all is still a wanted, desired thing, and it's still rewarded. Tip number 56 is about the Master Ball. Master Balls are very important and valuable. You almost never want to use Master Balls on alphas or legendary Pokemon. You only get one Master Ball per storyline, and you cannot get any more. They are untradeable and limited. I personally recommend saving Master Balls for shiny Pokemon that can KO themselves unexpectedly. You'd be surprised how many wild Pokemon are packing things like Self-Destruct, Memento, Final Gambit, or a plethora of other self-KOing moves. Even things like Takedown or Double Edge chipping down their HP onto shiny Pokemon is something to worry about. Using a Master Ball on an alpha Pokemon is essentially trading a very limited, untradeable, valuable resource for around 50,000 Pokeyen on average, which is disgustingly not worth it and can be made 10 times that within an hour or so. Similarly, with using Master Balls on legendaries, I strongly recommend against it, because if you fail to catch a legendary, it drastically lowers the encounter rate. Now, the encounter rate is kind of a secret when it comes to legendaries in PokeMMO, but the player base has theorized that it's probably around 1 out of 5,000. And it's also been theorized, once you encounter that legendary for the month, the second time you encounter it, so if you fail to catch it, if it KOs itself by struggling, or you just can't catch it for whatever reason, you accidentally kill it, the next time you re-encounter that same legendary, it's estimated by the community to be about 1 out of 500. So it's much better to just go take the hour or two to re-encounter that legendary than using your Master Ball. However, if you've already made this, in my opinion, mistake, and you've already used one of your Master Balls on these things, it's not the end of the world. Don't overstress about it. You have plenty more. The odds are you'll never need 5 Master Balls to catch 5 shiny Pokemon that can KO themselves. I also like to add here that if you want to go Master Ball 5 Bidoofs and it makes you the happiest little trainer in the world, I think that's amazing and a lot of fun. Do whatever brings you joy in the game. A lot of these tips do come down to efficiency, and I can give you the education and information, but you still need to make your own decisions. If Master Ball and Bidoofs makes you happy, then that's the right decision. For tip number 57, we're going to be carrying off of 56 again and going into more shiny hunting safety, essentially. You want to always check what Pokemon moves it will actually know in the fight, depending on its level in the wild. You can do so by checking the Pokedex and going to what level it is. So, for example, if I were to encounter a level 40 or higher Hoppip, it's most likely going to have the 4 previous moves. So, a level 45 or so Hoppip would have Worry Seed, Memento, Bounce, and Giga Drain. Memento obviously being the scariest move there, which faints the user. You could also double check by heading over to the GTL, searching for Hoppip and looking for like 45 levels and kind of doing like 45 to 50 and see what Pokemon, what Hoppip, see if they've been caught in the wild, which these have at the exact, Hoppip shiny hunting location. You can actually double check on the GTL just to make sure that these actually do have the moves that we were talking about, because it's not always 100% correct. And this does seem to be correct. We see Bounce, Memento, Worry Seed, Giga Drain. I also recommend even taking this a little bit further and doing a few test catches for every shiny hunting location you try. I know this sounds like a pain, but nothing is worse than going through an entire shiny hunt for 100 hours only to lose the shiny because you were unprepared for when it finally happens. Out of pure dumb luck, I've never lost a shiny up until this point, but I've had about 3 situations where I myself, with over 9,000 hours, was lazy and unprepared for a shiny, and I should have arguably lost them due to bad RNG and due to certain moves they had access to. On to tip number 58, preparation is key in PokeMMO. Specifically preparing for events will help you get such a huge advantage. I usually put out a preparation guide covering the possibilities for each event and what I'll personally be preparing, from Pokemon to Pokeyen to market moves to make and everything like that before an event and even during the event. Preparing before an event could be the difference of making a few million Pokeyen or making 30 to 50 to 70 mil like I did on these recent investments that I showed you earlier in the video. And for tip number 59, speaking of market moves and investments, the only real way to get insane levels of wealth in PokeMMO, I'm talking 500 million Pokeyen or even billions of Pokeyen, is gonna be investing. Investing is crucial for long-term wealth if you plan on playing PokeMMO for more than 2 years. But keep in mind, it is a patience game. If you aren't willing to hold an investment for at least 2 years, I wouldn't even recommend investing. There's a variety of things which could be considered investments in PokeMMO, but in general, you have your single vanities, which are sort of high risk, high reward. Your sealed product, which includes things like mysterious balls, red envelopes, goodie bags, Xmas presents, anniversary chests, etc. And these are low risk to medium reward, I would usually argue, but you do want to make sure you try to buy them at their bottom out price, which is an answer that nobody knows. If you ever come into a stream and ask me, hey, Patrouski, what is the bottom out price? Should I buy this thing? Should I invest in this thing? The truth is, I don't know 100%. I make my own investments, my own guesstimations, my own choices, and I encourage you guys to do the same. I can spread education. I can give you history of how certain items have performed. You can check out PokeMMO Hub, but I don't know the key to the market, as no one does. There's always a risk involved when you're making an investment. On to tip number 60, we are going to head back to the Pokedex completion and kind of talk about that. And the number one tip here is I cannot recommend you enough to start on your Pheno Pokemon ASAP. If you don't know, Phenos or Phenomena Pokemon are a Gen 5 mechanic, so they only take place in the Unova region. This is where you have a random chance in the world of seeing a shaking grass tile or a little whirlpool in the water or a little dust storm in a cave. And then if you step on that tile, you'll get what is known as a Pheno encounter, which gives you a unique Pokemon encounter, many of which can only be gotten via Phenos. And you also get a mysterious gem cluster for catching them, so you make a little bit of Pokeyen. Phenos are very random, and there's many Pheno-specific Pokemon that you will need to complete your Pokedex, things like Audino, things like Alomomola, things like Drillbur, etc. When you see a Pokemon is only caught via a special rarity in the wild, it usually means it's a Pheno Pokemon. And being stuck on Phenos is the last thing you want to have happen. You could be waiting weeks for one specific Pheno Pokemon. I recommend joining my Discord and signing up for the Pheno role to get notifications for whenever Phenos happen in-game. And you can always unselect or reselect that role if you want to get pinged or not, of course. Tip number 61 is that there are 3 main storyline fights across 2 regions that have been changed from the original game into boss battles. They are also uncatchable, which is important. These fights include the Giratina fight in Sinnoh, the Red Gyarados in Johto, as well as the Ho-Oh boss fight in Johto. I strongly recommend preparing for these boss battles ahead of time, as they can be really tough for certain storyline teams. An Ampharos with Discharge does wonders against Gyarados, and any Pokemon with Rock Slide for Ho-Oh is fantastic. You want spread moves that do 4 times damage to these powerful bosses. A Vanillix that sets up Snow and spams Blizzard can also be good against Giratina. Tip number 62 is that there is a flee warning in PokeMMO if you try to run from a shiny Pokemon or a legendary. So if you ever see a confirmation on your screen during a battle, really take a second and take the time to make your next click very carefully. And finally, for tip number 63, the final one of the video, equally as important as the first, it may seem silly, but it's really important to just Google any PokeMMO questions you may have and watch PokeMMO content creators that you enjoy. The amount of people that we have streaming and making videos about this game in 2025 is truly beautiful, and I would have killed for it back when I started playing the game in 2013. Better late than never, as they say. And a big thank you to everyone who makes awesome PokeMMO content. I will be linking just a few of my favorite channels in the description for you to check out, because there are a ton of underappreciated PokeMMO content creators who are really doing it just for the love of the game and to hopefully help as many people as possible, and they deserve more recognition. That's it. We did it. We made it. You guys watched the entire video. Thank you so much for that. This was a very deeply and tightly scripted video, but I didn't do anything for the outro. So I want to give a quick thank you to all of you guys for watching until the very end. I really hope there was at least one tip that you didn't know, something that could help your PokeMMO journey. Like the video if there was something, obviously. Dislike if there was 0 tips that was helpful and it wasn't even entertaining. Go ahead and leave that dislike. That's okay. Feedback is appreciated. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see daily PokeMMO videos. I've been uploading daily videos for the past 4 years or so now. So make sure to subscribe to see the daily content and keep interested in this beautiful game. You can also follow me on Twitch. I usually stream Monday through Thursday at 12 p.m. ET pretty consistently over there, as well as dual streaming on YouTube. So if you prefer that platform, you can go ahead and watch there as well. And then joining my Discord, like I mentioned for so many of the tips in this video, it really is a helpful place and not really due to any effort of my own. It's really the community's Discord, if anything. And finally, if you want to go above and beyond, if you can afford it and you've watched enough hours of my content and it's been helpful and it's been informative and it's been mildly entertaining as second monitor content, going above and beyond via YouTube memberships, Twitch Primes, Twitch subs, and PayPal/Venmo donations are crucial to this channel's success. It's crucial for me to be here. The fan funding that I get really makes it possible for me to make all the videos and guides that so many people, luckily and fortunately for me, really seem to adore. Every day, I'm really fortunate to wake up and make videos about a game that I just have loved for over a decade that really had no future over a decade ago. There was no careers when it came to PokeMMO. And the fact that I'm able to pay my rent and pay my bills by playing this silly little game and hopefully making some of you guys laugh and smile and helping your journey just makes my heart curl up. It's genuinely surreal and it does not go unappreciated. Thank you from the bottom pit of my heart. Thank you so much for every little minute you've ever watched of a video of mine. But that's it for me. If you have any questions or concerns, always let me know in the comments or reach out to me via Discord DMs. I'm going to peace out, let you guys get back to playing PokeMMO, have fun, and good luck in your PokeMMO journey. And for now, guys, peace-a-reno. Hey, thank you so very much for watching until the very end of the video. That means the world to me. And if your name is listed here, you're the reason I'm able to do this in the first place by going above and beyond and supporting the channel via YouTube memberships and Twitch Primes. Thank you so much. Have a great day.